A lot of people would see you as a sex kitten.
I really don't know what my have to do with it.
Your breasts.
My breasts.
Able to wear undergarments.
Just listen.
Imagine being on a TV show and showing up for the next season and meeting an actress who the director found because she played you in porn.
It's been a year since I pissed off the internet with my Power of Ugly video, and I'm back to maybe piss you off again. Why? Because we've come full circle, baby. Photos have recently been released of Sydney Sweeney's transformation for her new role as Christy Martin, and this is exactly what I was talking about. But this isn't going to be a remake of my first video. This time, while I still want to include Sydney and double down on my initial assertion, I also want to further expand the topic to discuss aging in Hollywood, the career projections of sex symbols like Pamela Anderson and Megan Fox, the harm that the wrong fan base can cause, and how branding choices can make or break a starlet's career. Now, a quick recap. If you haven't seen my first video, I made the assertion that for branding purposes, not for feminist, anti-feminist, moral reasons, or anything in between, but for branding and career longevity, Sydney Sweeney should take a, quote, ugly role before she leans too much further into this blonde bombshell stereotype that she's been embracing. And it's important that I mention, I quite like Sydney. I think she's a good actress and I enjoy her work. It's just that where she currently stands, she benefits those who make money on her image much more than she benefits herself long term. This rebrand that I suggested did not mean that Sydney could never take another sexy role or appear nude on screen again. It also didn't shame her for using her sexuality to boost herself into the spotlight or imply that there was anything wrong with the roles that she's taken so far. I merely suggested that because Hollywood moves through hot girl hyperfixation so quickly, that while the spotlight is shining squarely on her, she should subvert expectations with an ugly role before people get bored. This would keep things fresh and buy her more time as Hollywood's it girl. And I think Sydney is going to be able to do this with her upcoming role where she'll be portraying 90s boxer Christy Martin, who is a legend. She first and foremost helped bring female boxing mainstream, but also has a harrowing story of abuse and survival, fueled by her husband/trainer Jim, who attempted to murder her and left her for dead. Is Christy ugly? No, not at all, but she's a normal, unglamorous person whose focus on life was on her capabilities, not her looks, which is exactly what Sydney needs. Not to mention that this will hopefully be a really meaningful way for Christy to share her story of personal strength and resilience. For super beautiful women in Hollywood, their hotness is a tool that gets them in the door. But if they stay in that doorway for too long and don't go out of their way and fight to prove that they have more to offer, Hollywood will squeeze as much money out of them as they can before slamming the door just as quickly as they threw it open.
But I'm 27.
Yeah, but that's 59 in bunny years.
First, what is a sex symbol? According to Oxford Dictionary, it's a person who's widely noted for their sexual attractiveness. But to me, it goes much further than that. A sex symbol is the girl on the posters in teenage boys' rooms and named first when boys talk about their celebrity crushes. Sex appeal is probably the first trait you think of when she's mentioned, before her talent or personality or anything else. There also has to be some sort of cultural fascination with her. Actresses like Lily Rose Depp and Emilia Clarke have both taken on very sexualized roles, but I wouldn't say that either of them became full-blown sex symbols. And there are, of course, very different standards for male and lesbian sex symbols, etc., but I want to focus on the women who are considered to be male fantasies, since they're typically kept in the narrowest boxes. And since this conversation centers on reinvention using ugly roles, I'm going to keep the focus on actresses. And let me just say, before we go any further, you have no idea how many Who's Your Celebrity Crush TikToks that I watched trying to suss out which actresses best fit my criteria, and after eliminating all the singers, influencers, models, and joke answers,
Queen Elizabeth, R.I.P.
the top picks were definitely Sydney Sweeney, Megan Fox, Margot Robbie, Madison Klein, Jennifer Aniston, and Selena Gomez, if you consider her more of an actress than a singer.
Who is your celebrity crush?
Oh my god, Euphoria?
Oh, Sydney Sweeney?
Yes! She's very attractive.
Can I ask, what you like about Sydney Sweeney.
Oh, she has massive breasts.
Now, let's quickly reiterate, what do I consider an ugly role? Well, for one, I mean ugly according to Hollywood standards. And because Hollywood has such insane beauty standards, it doesn't take much for a role to be considered ugly. I don't mean it at all in a derogatory way. I'm simply using ugly as shorthand to describe how Hollywood views these characters. When I say ugly, I simply mean undone, unglamorous, and doesn't cater to the male gaze. This is in part because the sex symbol has to rewrite her own stereotype. The opposite of hot is not. So in order for people to see you as more than a pretty face and a hot body, you need to literally show that you are. More, that is. You have to literally shock audiences into perceiving you differently. And the more an actress has used her sexuality in the past, the farther the actress is going to have to lean into the so-called ugliness in order for this to be impactful. Meaning, Sydney is going to need more than some glasses and minimal makeup to change the narrative. And also, when looks aren't a factor, two things happen. First, audiences pay closer attention to the acting itself. And second, actresses are unencumbered by having to be a beautiful fantasy, and they can actually express a full range of emotions authentically. When they do this, we the viewers can watch without being potentially taken out of the moment with thoughts like, wow, she's even pretty when she cries. And this almost exclusively means portraying a real-life person. Hollywood rarely has the patience to portray any woman as ugly in a meaningful role unless there's a real-life person that they're using as a template. Otherwise, with few exceptions, in Hollywood, every single love interest, mother-daughter, retail worker, murder victim, flight attendant, and background character will be made hot because Hollywood is a fantasy. Consider the movie Uglies, which featured not a single ugly person. The uglies were attractive, normal-looking people, and the pretties were attractive in a way that looked uncanny, like they were created by an algorithm. That's Hollywood in a nutshell. Real is often considered ugly in such a plastic industry. Or the inverse. Consider the gorgeous Nicola Coughlan, who recently chose to appear very nude in Bridgerton as sort of an FU to body shamers. This was empowering for her as somebody who hasn't constantly been sexualized. This isn't a problem with nudity, but with how it boxes people in. Nicola used nudity to break out of her box, while others need to put nudity aside to break out of theirs. And most importantly, before we move on, please know that I am never, ever calling the actual real-life people being portrayed in biopics ugly. Never. Okay, back to Sydney. Despite having worked for quite some time in Hollywood, her role as Cassie in Euphoria was her breakout role. This is when she truly entered the public's consciousness, so Cassie and the roles that followed were the roles that formed the public's perception of her. The roles that came before don't really factor in. Similar to how people's awareness of Anna Kendrick formed when she did Pitch Perfect, despite having had previous roles in Twilight and Scott Pilgrim. And despite Cassie's range and complexities, her main goal as a character was always to appeal to men. She needed to gain male validation to make up for her father abandoning her. And for many viewers, despite understanding her complexities, her nudity overrode her humanity. They didn't care why she showed her boobs, they just liked that she did. So that became the impression that she left on the cultural consciousness.
Sydney Sweeney's got some big old titties.
Beautiful, messy woman shows boobs between bouts of mental instability. At the end of the day, it's just the crazy hot trope repackaged. Parody is a great barometer to gauge how someone is viewed on a larger scale, as it typically flattens a person into their most recognizable form. And for Sydney, this has heavily featured her breasts.
I presented them with a 5-point plan to break into acting. It was a PowerPoint presentation, and I still have it. Check it out. It says, audition, get an agent, do commercials and short films, then get my SAG card. But if that failed, I also presented them with a backup plan. Next slide.
Out of the hundreds of SNL sketches of season 49, her Hooters sketch became the 4th most rewatched, featuring her as a busty Hooters waitress who receives the best tips, leading to jealousy from her coworkers. And most recently, she parodied herself again in Dr. Squatch commercials.
Hello, you dirty little boys. Are you interested in my body? Wash.
Where she plays a genie version of herself that magically provides men with their greatest desires, which is body wash, apparently, with the double entendre tagline,
for men who prefer natural.
And this would be greatly successful if she was an Instagram model or a reality star or something where farming male approval fuels her work. Those jobs have a naturally short shelf life, and the best thing that they can do is squeeze every drop of advertising dollar out of it while people are still interested. A Dr. Squatch commercial would be the big leagues for an OnlyFans girls, but not so much for an actress who wants to be taken seriously. And she's done some great work since Euphoria, including work where the sexualization was minimal or non-existent even. But nothing that she's done so far has shifted this strong sexual impression that she's initially made, hence the need to intentionally subvert expectations. Now, we know that Hollywood loves a bombshell, and the requirements for that position include attributes like sex appeal, beauty, charm, and a great body, and youth. And unfortunately, women are only really seen as youthful for a very short window of their lives. Therefore, this youthful bombshell pedestal has an equally short life, often beginning when the actress is still a minor.
You selling little girls now, Madam Nell?
Some even being made to appear nude when they were still underage, like Ana de Armas or Brooke Shields, which is deeply concerning. Just look at Pam Anderson, Megan Fox, Britney Spears, Alicia Silverstone, Carmen Electra. All were the hottest young women of their time, but none of them were taken seriously. And then, when the next wave of hot young women took over Hollywood, they fell by the wayside. Audiences eventually get bored and move on to the next shiny new girl.
As much as this film looks at ageism, the young are also treated as equally disposable, and you see some of that in Hollywood.
Pam Anderson got a rare opportunity to rewrite her position through sheer luck just a few years ago when the show based on her life, Pam and Tommy, was made. It reignited interest in her and gave her a second chance in the spotlight. And this time, instead of being dehumanized and framed as this blonde bimbo who runs around with rock stars, we're getting a chance to appreciate her intelligence, big heart, and philanthropy. And as a part of her resurgence, she's chosen to frame her sexuality in a way that people didn't really expect. Recently, she's been appearing clean-faced, often covered up, and looking gorgeous and happier than ever, which in turn has made people see her in a new light. Those traits have always existed in her, but people didn't care until they stopped being distracted by her sex appeal.
Was that who you always were? But then there was a culture that said, wear the makeup, do the, and you had a role that was...
Well, it's great to be a part of pop culture, but it can be a blessing and a curse.
Yes.
To be loved one way. But yes, I've always been this girl, and I always felt like I was playing characters. But now I am me. I'm more me than I've ever been.
She absolutely should not have had to tone down her look to be recognized as a complex person, but sadly, that's often how society works, as wrong as that is. And what's ironic is that Pam, someone who was discovered and made famous based on her looks, had attempted to break into acting in her youth when arguably it should have been the easiest time for her to get roles. But once again, the only parts that she was ever really offered were based on her sex appeal. Barbed Wire, Baywatch, Stripperella, the only way she was getting the job was if she had her breasts out.
Why do you think Pamela has been underestimated by Hollywood and directors all along, and what does that say about Hollywood?
Being a beautiful woman, you get typecasted in a way.
But now at 57, she will finally star in a major motion picture in the upcoming movie The Last Showgirl, alongside Kiernan Shipka, Billy Lord, Brenda Song, and Jamie Lee Curtis, and directed by Gia Coppola. All because she was able to revive her career in a way that made the general public and Hollywood re-examine our views of her and what value she could bring to the screen.
Exciting doors are opening for me that never opened before, so I'm making the most of it.
But as deserved as it is, Pam's comeback is based in sheer luck, and very few former sex symbols will get this same type of second chance. And on the flip side, as I mentioned in my original video, Margot Robbie and Charlize Theron, who had previously been pigeonholed into this blonde bombshell stereotype, were able to successfully change the narrative around what roles they were suitable for with their portrayal of real, unglamorous, and unhinged women. This won them not only awards and recognition, but more importantly, longevity. What good is it to be the biggest star of your time if your time is only 5 years? If your goal is to have any lasting power as a sex symbol in Hollywood, you're gonna have to prove that you can be more than sexy before your time runs out. Again, I don't make the rules or even like them. And I also want to include Salma Hayek in this category. Salma, who was most often portrayed as the beautiful wild love interest, a damsel dancing on bars, or trapped in a cage in a skimpy outfit, or feeding Quentin Tarantino a river of beer poured down her leg, her toes in his mouth. And then she did Frida, which I would consider a version of an ugly role. Frida, while quite beautiful and vibrant, proudly sports facial hair and a short bob as opposed to Salma's usual flowing curls. She is sure of herself and has a lot of personal power. She exists for herself, not to be consumed by men. Unlike many so-called ugly roles, Frida Kahlo's sexuality is integral to her character, but unlike most sexy roles, her sexuality doesn't exist for the male gaze. It's simply another expression of her boldness, her free will, and her humanity. It's also important because Frida is impaled in a bus accident through her pelvis. This leads to a temporary loss of that freedom and sexuality as she bravely rediscovers herself. Her sexuality is vital to the story in an authentic way that doesn't just exist to sell tickets. She plays a fully fleshed out human, which is not usually afforded to sex symbols. You feel a clear difference watching Salma in Frida versus her previous roles, which is the most important part of an ugly role. And Angelina Jolie, Scarlett Johansson, and Halle Berry could also be included in this category. And while they have always been considered sex symbols, they also all made intentional choices not to focus solely on sexy roles early in their career. Each of them did a good mix of comedies, thrillers, historical dramas, and action movies. And because of this, they were never pigeonholed. Viewers watched their talent develop alongside of their hotness, which is a very powerful position for a woman to be in Hollywood. That said, Scarlett admits that she did feel a lot of pressure to conform to these sexy narratives that were being pushed on her, and made a very conscious effort to push back against that.
It was like very kind of hyper-sexualized. It was really difficult for me to try to figure out how to get out of being an ingenue or the other woman, because it was never anything that I had intended.
Right.
I sort of had to kind of shake it up a little bit because there seemed like there was just nowhere to go.
The nature of having been born a very beautiful woman, no matter what you said that you had been hypersexualized, I always felt that your talent superseded that.
Similarly, Natalie Portman revealed that she pushed against being over-sexualized after she gained a very creepy male fan base when she was just 12 years old by only taking prudish roles, and this may have saved her from a similar fate. And we're going to come back to male fan bases in just a few minutes.
Starting out, that I would get those jobs. You know, I would get the cutoff shorts and the other woman, one night stand girl. And I did about 3 or 4 of those. And I thought, I think I'm going to not do this anymore because I know where that road will go. I don't know what it's going to look like ultimately, but I bet it would be really hard to get off that road.
As for Margot and Charlize, I would argue that it is fully because of their so-called ugly roles that they were not Megan Foxed, so to speak, meaning that they weren't relegated only to hot girl roles, which quickly wither away. Megan's one sort of ugly role was in Jennifer's Body, and don't get me wrong, Jennifer was still incredibly hot, but similar to an anglerfish, her hotness was the lure that drew men into a monstrous trap. With rows of deadly teeth and black needle vomit who crouched in front of an open fridge shoveling fistfuls of rotisserie chicken into her mouth. She was allowed to explore this character in a way that partially freed her from the gilded cage that sexiness can be. Even though she cleaned up beautifully in between these grotesque scenes, it hinted that Megan was capable of more than the opportunities that she was being given. And while this role didn't require much serious, dramatic acting, she was brilliant as Jennifer Check, but wasn't appreciated at the time of release, which is crucial to leaving the hot girl narrative behind. Similar to how people kept referencing the movie Reality in my first video as Sydney's ugly role, this doesn't work. The point of taking an ugly role from a branding perspective is to change people's perception of you. Reality was straight to streaming, and if nobody sees the movie, then public perception cannot change. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it make a sound? Jennifer's body was seen by many but not appreciated, and reality was not seen by many but was appreciated by those who did. You must be both seen and appreciated to positively subvert the sex symbol narrative. And unfortunately, Megan was sort of shut out of the spotlight before being able to rebrand herself, though for her, I think there will always be a possibility of a comeback. I hear all the time that Megan Fox can't act, and I would argue that we actually don't know that to be true. The truth is, she was never really given the chance when she was developing as an actress. Casting directors hired her to be hot because that sells tickets. If she's hired to be hot, then she must act hot, meaning that she was basically burdened with being set decoration. Most young actors get better as they spend time on set trying on different characters and developing new skills, but not Megan. How can she show a full range of emotions and really let go into a character if she's first and foremost required to get the right angles and keep her face pretty? And then after years of this being her treatment, she becomes trained and socialized away from making unflattering faces and becomes stiff as a result. She essentially has had any ability to act trained out of her and substituted for sexiness. She did take a serious role in the Battle of Jansari, in which being beautiful wasn't the main focus of her role, so that was refreshing. But it didn't seem to get much traction or do anything to change her narrative. Her most recent role in Subservience is sort of a perfect commentary on her fate. It didn't subvert her stereotyping at all, but instead heavily played into it. In the movie, her role is as a sexy android made to serve and satisfy the man who purchased her. Exactly how Hollywood wanted her to be. Stiff, sexy, servile decoration. And no, it's not fair, but there will never be another Marilyn Monroe whose legacy as a sex symbol is their longevity. And sadly, part of the reason that she was able to hold on to this title for so long was because she died so young. The closest any modern woman has ever gotten to maintaining fame entirely on sex appeal, other than Megan Fox, is the Kardashians, and they need constant controversy and a whole family empire where they're constantly pimping out their youngest members in order to stay relevant and maintain the attention, and even then, it's been a struggle. But even Marilyn, the world's most famous sex symbol of all time, was constantly fighting to be seen as more. She loved books and had a huge collection that included everything from the classics to art history to poetry and politics. She took acting classes and was a good cook. She was one of the very few women at the time who enjoyed weightlifting. She loved classical music, animals, and gardening. And she even took some night classes at UCLA and did some promo photos for them. This photo mentions that her female friends welcomed her back with open arms as she resumed her studies. And this one is captioned, quote, "Marilyn looks lush behind a book, but men prefer to gander her in garb, showing off a provocative 37.5-inch bust."
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
And that short quote pretty much sums up her life. And that's not to say that Marilyn didn't have a hand in creating her sexy persona. She definitely did. But that was just one facet of her complex personality. She was a multifaceted woman who was boiled down to one thing in order for studios to maximize their profits. Sex sells, and once it becomes clear that a woman is profitable in that way, it's hard to be seen or cast as anything else. She petitioned 20th Century Fox, who of course owned her contract, to cast her as Grushenka in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. Their response dismissed her, saying 20th Century Fox is very satisfied with both the artistic and financial results from the pictures in which Miss Monroe has appeared. 20th Century Fox has no intention of granting Miss Monroe's request that she play in Brothers Karamazov. That said, modern-day sex symbols have a better chance at making it out of the sex symbol trap. With social media, they can more easily humanize themselves by showing their personalities and interests, and unlike the early days of Hollywood, actresses are no longer locked into contracts with movie studios, only able to create within the confines of the studio's vision of what they should be. That's also why so many young actresses have created their own production companies, so they have more control over the movies that they create and star in. Sydney, Margot, Charlize, Reese Witherspoon, Jennifer Aniston, and even Marilyn all went this route, though Marilyn mostly used her production company for tax reasons and never produced a single film. This was still an attempt for her, though, to have more control over her projects. And using these production companies is a great way to carve out a new path and create a different fan base for yourself. Because despite male fan bases allowing you to blow up overnight for your beauty, there is nothing more valuable than a female fan base. It's short-term versus long-term investment. My Matt Rife video a while back examined this phenomenon of female fan bases, which are often disrespected but incredibly lucrative. This is why Taylor Swift has gone as far as she has. She never tried to shy away from her female fan base, and because of this, it doesn't matter that men generally hate her. Male fan bases aren't the driving force behind most successful artists, and this translates back to sex symbols as well. Men are fickle fans, especially when it comes to women. Their support is much more important to franchises like Star Wars, Marvel, Lord of the Rings, Call of Duty, and less to individual people. If you look at comments on any video featuring Sydney or Megan, you'll see men criticizing them for having had plastic surgery or aging, calling them bad actresses, saying they've hit the wall. But in the same breath, saying they'd still fuck them though. That's not a fan base you want to have. They don't like these women, they actually kind of hate them. And while you can make money off these men, it's only as long as their desire to fuck you is stronger than their disdain. Pretty quickly, they're not paying to see your movies anymore. They're just searching up your nude scenes on Reddit. And when movie studios stop getting paid to feature you, they stop hiring you. Whereas female fans are lasting. We see this most clearly with musicians. One Direction, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Lana, Justin Bieber, hell, even the Beatles and Elvis. They were all made by their lifelong, mostly female and sometimes gay fan bases, who have supported their work over decades and throughout their different phases. Instead, she's really let her brand revolve around attracting males. And whether this was a strategic choice or just her natural inclination towards male-dominated hobbies like fixing cars and sports, I don't know, but the intention doesn't really matter when the results are the same either way.
Weirdly, a lot of my fans are men.
I wonder why.
However, Sydney's Euphoria co-star Zendaya is an actress who very smartly sidestepped this trap. She started on Disney like so many other child stars, but when she was ready to move on to more adult roles, she didn't fall into the common pitfall of taking on overly sexy characters to show her maturity. Instead, she used fashion. This allowed her to still be seen and talked about in a more adult way while showing her personality and creativity as she transitioned slowly away from kid movies into the mainstream. I think one of the smartest moves that she made was by appearing on the very adult show Euphoria, but by taking the least sexualized role. This allowed her to be in an explicit show with mature audiences and show a lot of dramatic range, establishing herself as a serious actress first, before she took on sexier roles like Tashi and Challengers. And if you think about it, her role as Rue in Euphoria was sort of an ugly role. She was the least sexualized and least glamorous of the main cast, and it really paid off in her favor. Like I mentioned, once you establish that your sex appeal is profitable, it can be really difficult to get other roles. It's better to first establish the fact that you are profitable in general, no matter the character. In my opinion, Zendaya and her team have made some of the smartest career moves of any young actor or actress out there currently, and she will have a very long and healthy career because of it. Now, an uncomfortable truth in this whole sex symbol conversation is the lack of racial diversity. Not to mention other types of diversity that are hardly represented in film at all, let alone as sex symbols. Curiously, despite POC women often being hypersexualized, they usually aren't pedestalized for it. Like I mentioned earlier, not every beautiful actress is put in the sex symbol box, even if they have all the traits required to become one. As it stands, sex symbols are already a dying breed, and as the numbers shrink, so does the diversity. If you Google sex symbol actresses, the list you're given is almost exclusively of white women, no matter the era you search. Historically, when sex symbols were much more common in general through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was some POC representation like Dorothy Dandridge and Eartha Kitt, but it was also very common for POC actresses to be made to get surgeries and painful procedures in order to hide their racial identities. Think Rita Hayworth and Donna Drake. That said, while the movie industry is still hyper-focused on telling stories featuring white people, we definitely see much more sex symbol diversity when we get into the music industry, where there are very different rules. Instead of portraying a character where they often have much less creative control over the writing process like actresses do, singers are playing a caricature of themselves, so everything is very individualized and their personalities are more on display. Not to mention that for singers, their sex appeal is a great marketing tool, and they're often encouraged to heavily lean into their sexuality on stage and in music videos, sometimes more than they want to. And because of this, most singers become sex symbols to a degree. This is especially the case for entertainers and full package singers if you watched my last video. And unlike actresses, singers don't need to be seen as serious or multifaceted in order to have a long career. As long as they keep putting out good music, they'll find an audience, and that audience will double, triple, and quadruple if they look hot while performing. There's no real downside to being a sex symbol as a singer. And before we wrap up this portion, I have to very quickly mention that Colombian-born actress Sofia Vergara is currently bending all of the rules as a sex symbol. She got her big breakout role at 37 years old and was well respected before ever taking a serious or ugly role with Griselda. And that's because her undeniable beauty is balanced with undeniable charm and humor, making her incredibly likable. In that regard, she's an anomaly, and that takes us to our last topic: aging. And sadly, the more a starlet ages, the more she'll be shunned by her male fans especially.
They were written to be the fantasy of men, and women were playing the fantasy of men, and they were edited to be the fantasy of men. And the critics decided if you met the fantasy, and that was it. Right?
Think of the recent movie Substance, how beautiful Demi Moore was being pushed out of the spotlight in favor of younger, perkier Margaret Qualley. And that was after her character was already pushed out of Hollywood, relegating her to a cable fitness show. No major spoilers, but by the end of the movie, she's changed so much that she becomes unrecognizable, and her blood is quite literally on the hands of the audience who drove her to her breaking point. And many women who have been valued solely on their looks often become unrecognizable in pursuit of something that once was as they age out of the spotlight, much to the dismay of the general public, who will act as if they don't understand why this former starlet is chasing their youth, as if they aren't also the ones constantly criticizing her naturally changing looks.
I think it's a shame that as women, we're being told that we have to find a way to stay eternally young, forever 30. And unfortunately, we're turning ourselves into monsters trying to do that.
But really, you can't outrun the inevitable. All the time, news anchors are swapped out for younger stand-ins while their male counterparts bald and gain weight and wrinkle. Young, beautiful women are cast as the doting wives of incompetent, slovenly men who are a decade plus older than them. Or most absurdly, cast to play the mothers of sons who in real life are the same age as them, as was the case of Angelina Jolie and Colin Farrell in Alexander. Similar to child stars, there are very few aging female sex symbols who can successfully make that transition to the next stage of their career. The options for a former sex symbol who never subverts their stereotype seem to be marry rich in real life and disappear, or take MILF roles. Very few can hold on to their relevance as their looks fade.
It's, what the business has for you. It's like, oh, you're playing that sexy older woman, you're 37.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy, right?
Right? They were offering me grandmother roles when I was 33,
Jesus
34.
Christ.
Hey, I've had a great run. I've done exclusives with Kissinger, the Dalai Lama, Muhammad Ali. Now I'm being replaced by a young thing whose grandmother loves me.
Kirsten Dunst took a 2-year break from acting after getting nominated for an Oscar, and she's laying the blame squarely on Hollywood's ageism and sexism. In a new interview with Marie Claire, Dunst says she hasn't been acting much lately because, quote, every role I was being offered was the sad mom.
So let's wrap it up because this has gotten really long. In conclusion, there's nothing wrong with sexy personas. However, if you're not careful to balance out sexiness early in your career with things like humor and intelligence in ways that are indivisible from your persona, you will be flattened into a one-dimensional sexy caricature. And the only escape once you're viewed as this sexy caricature is by shocking people into reevaluating their perception of you. A dramatic, well-acted, ugly role is the most straightforward, foolproof way to do this. And that's because the ugly role isn't just an ugly role. It very often allows a starlet to be humanized in ways that aren't possible when they're being viewed as a sex object. So who else do you think needs an ugly role? Or are you still not convinced of the value of one? Let me know below, and if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I'll be back soon with another pop culture video analysis, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!